My guest today is Michele Leroux Bustamante. Michele, how are you today?
Great. Thank you, David. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm so excited to have you on my show. And would you tell us,
It's my
please?
first time.
It is your first time. How did that take us so long? It took
I
us
don't
almost
know.
like 900
So
episodes.
weird.
That's,
Yeah,
on,
we keep
that's
running
on
into each
me.
other here and there at conferences and then, forget to follow up.
But the story has a happy ending. We're here now. And please tell us, what do you do for a living?
I own a company called Alliance. It's a consulting organization, and I'm also founder of a product called Policy Server, which is an access management system for .NET developers.
Awesome. And you're not only owner of a company and developer of a product, but you're also a frequent speaker at conferences, including your own conference. And
Yeah.
you talk a lot about a lot of things, but I think security is one thing you're really well known for, correct?
Yeah, it's probably identity and cloud security at scale are the two biggest topics for me throughout the years, which is interesting because today everybody's talking about AI, and obviously as a leader, I understand and know all the things our team does, but I've just always stayed in the foundation of like, we need all these other things in the platform to support AI. So it's what I know. I stay here.
Oh, it's good though. Everybody's going to need security. There's things that go in and out of fashion.
Yep.
Security never so. It's always a priority.
Yeah.
The reason you're focused on it, I think, is because your customers need that and are focused on it, or should be. So,
Yeah, it does seem like that's as hot as AI right now. I mean,
totally agree.
Honestly, with all of the concerns around ransomware and breaches, it's never been more important, and everybody cares about it. But sometimes the budgets don't, get lifted for it until something goes wrong, which is unfortunate.
Right.
So I try to just get out there and talk about things you can do to, I know shift left is kind of a key phrase, but it's true. How do we shift left and sort of at least plan as much as possible for the security aspects up front?
Yeah, that is unfortunate that sometimes it's because it's not a profit center and because it's not costing us money today to have poor security that people sometimes will deprioritize it. But it is.
Yeah, that's like
100%.
product owners don't sell security features. That's the problem.
Is that because consumers don't care that they prioritize it less?
Well, they want features on their product, but the security that goes into the features is just a given.
They just
But
assume that
it's
the
not
security
part of the sale, right? You can't say, hey, we focused our whole quarter on adding security features, buy our product. So they want features, real features. Yeah.
Right. They want features, but they need security. Let's talk a little
Exactly.
bit about what that means in terms of how they should be thinking about if you've got a consumer-facing product that's on the web and massively scaling. Security has to be built into it. What sort of things do we need to think about?
So typically up front, you have a design for your project, right? For the solution. If it's multi-tenant, single tenant, we're hosting on which cloud. And you have to have an idea what the solution will be before you even build the topology, right? So are we, websites and APIs? Are there third-party integrations with APIs? What kind of database do we need in the back? Is it document-based? Is it, relational? So there's an architecture that you would start with. And as part of that architecture, we would build in an identity story. We need to know, where do the users go? Because this is consumer identity and access management. If it's part of a public facing product, it's SIAM. It's not, your corporate users, which live in your Entra ID. Although you might use Entra ID to store these users as well. It's just separate from your corporate.
All right, let me get a little vocabulary here. SIAM is what?
Consumer identity and access management.
And Intra is?
Entra ID would be Microsoft's identity platform, which also, is typically used for corporate identity. First and foremost, all of us log into, M365, and, once we log in, we were getting access to Office and SharePoint and OneNote and all the things Microsoft, plus other products that integrate with that identity. So I have one login for my corporate, and I get single sign-on to all my things. All the applications I use. And then when we think about SIAM, we think about end users, like, the people that come and use my product, they don't live in my corporate directory, but they need a directory to live in. I need those
Mm.
usernames, passwords to be somewhere. And, so simple example would be I have, Pinterest, right? A lot of consumers sign up for Pinterest or Facebook. It's just users. They need to
Right.
live somewhere, but it's not a corporate identity.
Got it. Okay.
And then
Thanks for
there's a
clarifying.
sweet spot in the middle,
Yeah.
which is I might have a product that is multi-tenant, and some of my customers are big companies like banks or, education institutes or whatnot, and they want to log into their Entra ID.
Ah,
So, you might have users that are loose in your system, and then you've got users that live in their directories, and then you've got your corporate users for your organization. So there's a bunch of user populations. We have to figure out where they live. Yeah,
it's complicated. How do we
it
do
can
that?
be.
What sort of things we need to think about?
Well, we need to think about, again, if we think about the user populations, then we've got the first step done. And then we come back to our architecture for our application. We're building this architecture for a solution in the cloud. And if it's multi-tenant, then we consider how do I get those users to log into their tenant, which would be something called home realm discovery or HRD. And that would be a way to, have you ever gone to a login page where it said enter your email first? And then once you enter your email, it redirects you to a place to log in and finish.
Okay.
So usually that's because they're trying to figure out, well, do you belong to Microsoft or Soliance or,
Got it.
ExxonMobil or whatever company? And then once I know your domain, I can send you to log in and finish. So that would be an example of multi-tenant architecture. So we need to understand, are we going to do that and how will we do it? You might add on to that social. What if I'd like to sign up with, Facebook or Google or LinkedIn or any other, people are logging in these days with Apple or Amazon Pay.
Mhm.
So there's very popular, signups, and they do that because they want no friction. So
Right.
they'd like people to be able to quickly sign up and not have to create a whole account and password. So you just let them log in over there and come back. And then I know who you are because I got back the information about your proof of authentication. So,
Totally get it. I remember the early
yeah,
days of the web when I had 100 different login for 100 different websites with
right.
100 different passwords. And of course, the foolish way that I solved it was by having the same password for
Right.
every site, which was a mistake.
Well, somebody breaches one password and then now
Exactly.
they can go try it out other places. So that's why they tell you to do different passwords. Yeah.
But I can't remember different passwords. But
No,
still.
and so that's the other problem. So what a lot of times people have a suffix that's common
Uh-huh.
and then a prefix that's unique to the place. So that
Or they
might
use
make it
a
easier.
password manager, which is I finally
Or obviously
figured
that's
out.
even better. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about, grandma, grandpa, like, my dad, like he's
He's
not
got
going
the
to use a
post-it
password
note on
manager.
the monitor with all the
Yeah.
passwords written
Or a
on it.
password book that actually says my passwords.
Don't steal that book. I've actually thought about that. If someone's in my house and looking at that file that has my passwords in it and sitting at my desk, I've got bigger problems than stealing my password because
Right,
they've
because they
broken
got
into
in your
my house
house.
already.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah,
I like.
passwords is
Yeah.
another interesting problem because like really the only way to protect yourself is you have to have MFA, right? The number one breach or cause of breach is lack of MFA.
MFA
Um,
is
multi-factored authentication. So the idea of course, the lowest form is email, which is a terrible idea. So don't use that. SMS is the common one, right? Your phone, you get a text with some numbers. That is actually not preferred anymore, but it's extremely common still, even with
mhm,
banks, because it's accessible to the general consumer.
right.
And then when we go from there up, now we're getting more complicated because we might have to have a authenticator on our phone.
Mhm,
And so now I have to know how to install an authenticator and deal with that. Obviously, tech people do that all the time. We've got Duo or other things.
mhm,
But, my father's not going to do that.
right.
So he's using SMS. And so then you've got, obviously the key fobs and FIDO devices that will also support like YubiKey. And that would be a device now that you can use for the multi-factor. But the most accessible form is now passkeys. So passkeys are a great way to add MFA and alternate your login from an unsafe, username and password to an actual sort of combo. It's my login and it's my MFA at the same time, because passkeys in the browser, for example, um, when they say create a passkey, you're essentially using your fingerprint on your device, like my Mac,
Mm.
and then it's saving that, and it can save it across my iCloud so that it's backed up.
Okay.
And now every time I go to that site, I just have to put my finger on the fingerprint reader, and I get into the site, and it saves it in a secure storage. So that's very accessible to the consumer, and doing well. But yeah, I guess the point we were really making is, without MFA, you have big problems. It's
Yeah.
really a super big risk.
Yeah. So the big problem is that we want to make it more secure without making it so complicated that people won't do it.
Right.
That's the balance we could
Exactly.
strike. All right, let's get back to
Yeah.
the idea of designing these
Yes.
applications, asset applications, and yeah, I get that. I think we've covered that. We have to have security built in up front. It can't be plugged on after as an afterthought, like I've seen happen many times. But once
Right.
it's in, once we've implemented security, are we done? Is it okay? App secure. Now we can just move on to something else and forget about it.
Yeah. So we talked about the solution is secure. So first thing is, we have a solution architecture. Then we've got, okay, how does identity work? Moving on, now we have to think about, how are we securing our APIs? And APIs typically need some form of, a token that you can get from your login. So completing the login brings back maybe an API token I can now, from my web app, pass down to the first tier of APIs. And then, those APIs, that basically says this app is allowed to call the API, but it also passes is a secure way to pass the user identifier, knowing they actually logged in. So we know this user ID is the one calling. So if I need to check that you're allowed to do this action, I have the material I need to do so. So we have to look at the topology, the architecture. Where do the identity tokens go? What is the session management? Like, when do the API keys expire? How do I renew them? That whole thing is the identity story. And then you have the access management story, which is, are you as a user authorized to do this action? So I have your user ID, and I know who you are, and I know you logged in, and I know the app is allowed to call the API because we check that too. So am I allowed to delete these reports? Yes
Got
or
it.
no?
That's the
So
distinction
now,
between authentication, which you described earlier with the login, and authorization, which you're talking about right now. Do I have
that's
permission
right.
to do
Yeah.
perform the actions?
Yeah.
Um,
So the authorization piece is interesting too, because usually there are a few ways people do it. If you do it in your identity system where you give me roles, then my token is likely to eventually get bloated, and I'm going to have a proliferation of too many roles eventually, because we'll need different roles for different things. And now we have to add a new role that has only these capabilities, and another one for only those capabilities. And, we've seen systems which end up with 200 roles that could be reduced to, 20 if you did permission based instead. So, you get your identity system returning, roles, or worse, permissions in the token, and the token gets too big, and then it can't be, presented properly to the API. It'll get blocked, with the browser. The size is too big. It's kind of messy. So we really don't want to do authorization in the identity system if at all possible. What we want is the application owns the rules, or you centralize it in a product. So, I mean, I mentioned, of course, shameless plug, Policy Server as our product that does the centralized authorization, where you manage it all in one place, and then the applications configure their requirements in there. But there are other tools for that you could do yourself, using like OPA as well, right? So Open Policy Agent has an open source tool for that if you want to build it yourself. Um, the point is, centralizing is good if you want governance and audit and history of, this user had this role at this time when that breach happened. So if you care about those things, writing it yourself becomes, a lot. But at least I would say, don't do it in identity, do it in the app, unless you have lots of apps, and then think about centralizing. So that would be the the third thing around the steps to getting a secure system, right? Design the topology, figure out your identity story, and then figure out your authorization story and what your requirements are. Um, but we still haven't talked about the platform, which would be the next layer.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So yeah, so of course, all of this is leading to how are we deploying this application to our cloud? Let's just assume it's a cloud first for the time being.
Right.
So I'm going to have, is it containerized or not? And this is a really big topic these days because, containers have gotten a lot easier to work with. However, you know, it still adds layers of things you have to do that get difficult for small teams who they don't have the staffing or the expertise to do it. So I've kind of evolved my thinking, at least as I look at all these different customers that we manage. We have a lot of customers where we help them build the system and deploy it, but we also actually manage their operation in the cloud, right? And again, you want to cost contain as well as be secure and do the right things. So app services are great. Microsoft, like Azure, does a great job of platform as a service. You can just deploy to app services and then have your database behind, and then your application topology becomes, directly deployed to these app services. And obviously, we need networking and protection, around the system we've deployed. But the simplest piece of it is I've got apps, APIs, and data, right? That's the main thing.
Tell me more about the topology.
Yeah. So we have the apps deployed, so app services data, for example, or it could be containerized and data. Okay. But we still need networking and structure around that. So I think the thing that I would recommend, and again, this is a short conversation, so we're not obviously designing a whole system, but number one thing, make sure, you have a web application firewall up front, because that will catch, the top 10 OWASP failures that typically cause breach. And if you don't have a web application firewall, it's a big problem. So put front door, turn on WAF, or if you don't use front door, use traffic manager and app gateway, but turn it on. That's the number one thing. Um, Separately from that, obviously, you should have secure networking. So consider separating, obviously, data from a separate network from your app services. And then use managed identities for everything in Azure, because managed identities will give you, without having to store secrets, a way to securely have every application and API be known when it calls, sort of like when it calls to the database, for example, or if it calls to Key Vault, or if it calls to, storage. Like, you want to identify every single endpoint against every resource that it tries to access.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that we use managed identities, and we want to make sure we're using networking and private link, which gives you an IP address to secure point to point. So these are great small list of things to make sure you do. And, there's a bigger topic on how do I design for that, but, I think it gives you the idea. These are things you should look to do.
I like it.
Yeah.
And I've been using about the last 12 months or so. I've bought entirely into managed identities, where I'm allowing Azure to manage the identity itself and the passwords. So that's one less password I have to remember, write down, refresh when it expires. That's
Right.
offloaded to someone else, and that's
Right.
a big headache removed. One point of failure that could happen.
Yeah,
Okay,
key
once
management is a big problem.
sure.
Key management and key rotation, and you want to try to remove that from the equation, because if I told you how many sites I've heard of that went down because a key rotation wasn't
Expired.
known in advance, it just expired. It's a terrible problem, and it's so
Absolutely.
easy to solve. Yeah.
So once the application is designed, it's deployed. We've got the topology in place. Everything's deployed. We're not done yet. We still need to verify that it is secure.
Right. Exactly.
How do we do that?
Yeah. So, oh, sorry, I interrupted you. You say that again.
How do we do that?
So once we're deployed, now we kind of have an interesting thing to work through, and that is, how do I know that I've done everything I could do to make this a secure solution, right? So imagine you're the CISO or executive in an organization. You're the one who's going to be held accountable if there's a breach. So what I like to tell people is, so imagine you're the one who's accountable. How will you know that all the people that work on these solutions did the right thing? And it's impossible, right? So what's the way that you can sort of give structure around making sure we check the boxes? And so I like to use the NIST CSF, which is a cybersecurity framework that gives you a long set of guidance on how to protect, detect, respond, govern, identify problems. There's a whole, list of, it's a large spreadsheet of many, many pieces of guidance that help you as a team, check the boxes. Okay, are we doing this, this, and this? And it helps you with not only all the things we've already talked about, but also the monitoring and governing side, right? Like, so first things first, you have to protect, which is do all the right things to secure stuff, which we just talked about high level. And then, you want to, so you're trying to, prevent, and then you want to detect. So detecting means, you've got a way to discover if something went wrong. So now we need tools that will give us, information. So the web application firewall would be part of detect, right? And prevent, because it's going to obviously, kick out any requests that aren't clean, and that fail any of the OWASP rules, for example. So when I think about CSF, I think about a long checklist that lets me eventually build a dashboard for my CISO that essentially shows 6 pretty pictures of where do we stand in our security level on, again, prevent, detect, respond, recover, identify, and govern. There's 6 categories. And I just want to know, on a scale of 1 to 4, how are we doing?
Okay.
So those are the
you
the
got monitoring
metrics.
tools to measure those metrics and some data how
Exactly.
to pair them to acceptable levels of those metrics.
That is right. So I'll use things like, if you use Defender in Azure, you're getting a ton of value right there, because now you're getting the detect. So you have prevent with your work, you have detect with that, and then you can start responding. And the respond part is what you do after you detect, which means go through all those reports and say, I fixed it, I fixed it, I fixed it. But here's the thing, if you turn that stuff on and you don't have somebody monitoring and acting on it, it's useless. So this is
Right.
another problem. You don't want to pay money for things, and then not use them.
Absolutely.
So you have to have a person that's looking at this, the output of these things, and therefore acting. And that's what gives you the biggest value. The other thing is Sentinel, obviously. Sentinel will give you anomaly reports, and it will observe if traffic looks strange, or there's a bounce of errors more than usual, or, the list goes on. And you can then therefore review those reports and act, or create automatic alerts. And so you can keep informed. And so we use those tools a lot, and we map them directly to the NIST CSF. I actually just did a talk on that recently at a conference. And we have a bunch of instruments that we use to make that really easy for a CISO to understand with pretty pictures. And it helps a lot. So I would say take a look at NIST CSF as a guide on doing all the things right from the beginning to end, from secure by design all the way through to, managing and operating and governing.
Awesome. Now, you talked a lot about looking at reports, but early on you mentioned AI, just kind of in passing. Can AI help with this?
Absolutely, and it already is, right? I mean, even if you look at using the tools like Sentinel, right? I mean, there are hooks in there that are automatically reviewing and detecting. There are a lot of burgeoning tools out there in security that are leveraging AI for looking for fraud alerts, or fraudulent behavior. I mean, I couldn't even go through the list. There's a ton of capabilities out there, from the identity side all the way through to governing within the cloud, right?
Sure. And I bring this up because I know that sometimes when you're just looking at reports, the information that's collected can be overwhelming, and it's hard to
That's right.
find patterns in there. And so that's something that's aware that something like AI can help to pull those patterns out,
To simplify it, or
to
yeah, review
simplify
and
it.
give you a
Exactly.
digest.
Great
Yeah,
way to
the
put it.
problem with that is the potential hallucinations that we see, though,
Sure.
too, when you point AI at, even a targeted set of data, it could be right, it could be
Mm.
maybe not right. So you still have to have a human look at that and say, does that make sense? Okay.
The human in the loop.
The human in the loop is
Don't
important. I
100%
think it will be
trust
for a
AI.
while.
That's
Yeah.
I 100%
But
agree.
it's great for time saving, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're just about at time. So let's wrap this up. What's some final thoughts that some wisdom you can impart to our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say that implementing a large scale cloud architecture and the security of that, involves many moving parts. And so, everybody has a role, right? Your architects need to design the topology, and then your security overlay needs to look at how do we secure all the layers and what techniques we're using. Identity is itself a massive topic. Access management is a massive topic. And then the platform topology, is another topic that we need to look at. So I've mentioned a few things we should do, but it's important that you have like some, I guess procedure within your SDLC that makes sure all those things are coming together with a plan before you execute or while you execute early on so that you can, have it secure from the beginning, because it's a lot harder to do it later. And I guess I would give another tip. I do run into customers that have development environments that are not matching production. And in some cases, they're locking developers out of looking at logs and audit trails that could help them troubleshoot in upper
Mm.
environments. So it's really important that platform topology, if possible, it looks exactly the same in dev. So you go through that pain up front, create a
Mm.
sandbox if you need a freebie area, but like you need dev to be truly looking like prod and security posture so that you're through the pain, you know how to do it, and now every environment is predictable. And you're not, because what happens is if you finish the work in dev and dev doesn't look like QA, product people think, oh, we're almost done. It's going to QA now. And then you go through all this pain getting it working in QA because you didn't have to do the pain in dev. So that's another problem. Then they blame the developers that why is it taking so long? Why do you have
Blame the
so many mistakes?
developers.
But
Those poor
we
guys.
didn't know that we had an API in QA, but we didn't have an API, sorry, API gateway, but we
Yeah.
have one here, so it's kind of a, shift left is a real thing,
Shift
right? Get
left.
that
I've
stuff
kept
done
thinking of that
early.
phrase.
Get that stuff done early and, pay attention. So I think if you do it early, you're going to be safer.
All right. Well, in the last minute or so, can you tell us about this conference that you're involved in that I had the privilege to speak at last month?
Oh, well, cybersecurity intersection, we co-located alongside Dev Intersection. And so that was pretty exciting. And it's our first time. And the focus is really just bring security, focused Microsoft security topics together and great people like yourself to speak and tell the world. So yeah, we were really excited to have that. And we're looking forward to the next one and see how we shape that up.
Have you scheduled the next one yet?
No, we're looking at 2026 to see when's a good time. So yeah, there's always that planning period where you got to figure out which location's going to be the best.
I look forward to hearing about it.
Yeah.
Michelle, thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for
being
being with
there.
us. I learned something today, and I hope everybody at home did as well.
Thank you, David. I'm so excited we got to do this finally. So thanks for having me. So I like to say I came for the technology, but I stayed for the friends. And the reason I say that is because, I started as a developer, but back in the late 90s, I started publishing and speaking at conferences, and I got to meet all these amazing people all over the world, including yourself. And I'm really just grateful that because of this technology work that I do, I got to meet all these friends. And even when we started our company's alliance, we started it with that in mind. We work with our friends, we collaborate with our friends, and they're all technology nerds and they're amazing. And we bring them together and we have a great time. So thank you, technology, for giving me this life.